Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button. Not because it helps the channel, but because what you're about to hear might make you question how safe you really are. Comment if you have seen it coming, because no one in this town did. The police sirens broke through the quiet fog that blanketed the little California suburb of Fallbrook. It was 2010, a quiet Wednesday evening, the kind of night when people water their lawns and left their porch lights glowing. Inside the two-story stucco house at the end of Avocado Vista Lane, the McStay family's dinner plates were still on the table. The chicken had gone cold. The dog was whining at the back door. When San Diego County deputies entered the home, nothing looked out of place, except for one thing. There was no one there. Joseph and some McStay and their two little boys, Johnny and Joseph Jr., were gone. Not a struggle, not a broken window, not a sign of forced entry. Just gone. Their car, a white Isuzu Trooper, turned up days later, abandoned near the Mexican border. Detectives thought they'd left voluntarily. Maybe the family wanted a new life, a quiet escape. It wouldn't be the first time someone had done that. But inside the car was something strange. Their children's car seats, still buckled in place. No parent leaves car seats behind when they plan to start over. Detective Troy Dougal, a man known for his calm precision, was the first to admit it. "Something's off," he muttered to his partner. "If they ran, they didn't plan it. If they were taken, the why doesn't make sense." Neighbors had seen nothing. Security cameras from nearby businesses showed a vehicle similar to McStay's heading south toward Tijuana, but the footage was grainy. Investigators couldn't make out who was inside. Yet the idea took hold. Maybe they crossed the border. Maybe this wasn't a crime at all. But Summer's family didn't buy it. She loved those boys. Her sister said tearfully in an interview she'd never just vanish. As days turned into weeks, the McStay home became a time capsule. Bills piled up, dishes gathered dust. A calendar hung on the wall still marked February 4th, the last day anyone heard from them. Phone records went silent. Email stopped. Their business, Earth Inspired Products, was thriving. Money wasn't an issue. The public was obsessed. Talk shows speculated wildly. Had Joseph fled financial trouble? Had Summer taken the kids after an argument? Or was something darker hiding beneath the surface? Detectives followed every lead. A reported sighting in Mexico, a cryptic text from one of Joseph's business partners, a suspicious new bank account. But every trail ended in dead air. Then came the first real break. 6 months after the disappearance, a neighbor recalled seeing a stranger's truck parked outside the McStay home late one night. She couldn't remember the plate, but she remembered something else. A decal on the window, a skull wearing a construction helmet. That was enough for detectives to connect a name. Charles Chase Merritt, business associate, friend, and the last person known to have spoken to Joseph before he vanished. Merritt was a rough-edged man in his 50s with mechanic's hands and a gambler's heart. He'd helped Joseph design decorative water fountains for luxury homes. Their partnership had been profitable, but tense. Merritt was deep in debt, and Joseph had recently talked about parting ways. When detectives called him in, Merritt was cooperative, overly so. "Joe was my best friend," he said, his voice steady but his eyes restless. "He wouldn't just disappear. Something happened, and I want to help find out what." But when investigators checked Joseph's QuickBooks account, they discovered something alarming, for checks had been written to Merritt, dated after the McStays disappeared, all forged. The man who claimed to be helping was cashing out the business. Still, it wasn't enough to arrest him. Without bodies, there was no proof a crime had even occurred. The case went cold. The home was sold. Detectives transferred. Years passed. Every so often, a new tip surfaced, a supposed sighting in Baja, California, a voicemail from an untraceable number. But each turned to nothing. Then, in November 2013, a motorcyclist riding off-road near Victorville stumbled across something half-buried in the desert sand. At first, he thought it was an animal skeleton. Then he saw the cloth, fragments of what looked like children's pajamas. When forensics teams arrived, they uncovered 4 sets of remains. 2 adult, 2 children, all buried in shallow graves. Dental records confirmed it. Joseph, Summer, Johnny, and Joseph Jr. They hadn't fled anywhere. They'd been murdered, bludgeoned and left in the middle of nowhere. The news shattered what was left of the community's hope. Reporters swarmed the desert, broadcasting images of detectives combing through sand, the sun glaring off white evidence tents. Detective Dougal stood at the site, silent. The scene didn't make sense. Whoever did this hadn't panicked. They'd taken time, dug 2 separate graves, covered them just enough to let the desert hide the truth. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Now, the focus turned back to Merritt, the forged checks, the money, the timing, the motive, but the deeper they looked, the more contradictions appeared. Merritt's alibi was weak, but not non-existent. His truck's GPS had gaps, suspicious, but inconclusive. His cell phone records placed him near the McStay home the night they disappeared, but prosecutors couldn't tie him to the burial site. And then came the strangest discovery of all, a missing hard drive from Joseph's office computer. When investigators finally recovered a copy of his data from a cloud backup, they found something that made the case explode open again. A document dated the day before the family vanished. A business contract. Joseph McStay's signature, and another one beneath it. Not Chase Merritt's. Someone else had been involved. Someone no one had suspected. As the realization hit, Detective Dougal whispered to the partner, "This just got bigger than we thought." Because if the document was genuine, it meant that the man everyone thought was guilty might not have acted alone or at all. And when they went to question the person whose name appeared on that contract, their house was empty, just like the McStays had been 3 years earlier. When Detective Troy Dougal pulled into the driveway of the address listed on that recovered contract, something felt wrong. The small ranch house sat at the edge of Escondido, its curtains drawn tight, mail overflowing from a box. No cars, no lights, no movement. The name on the contract was Michael Westerfield, a name that hadn't appeared anywhere in the McStay investigation until now. Supposedly a subcontractor, yet no records of his business existed. No tax ID, no licensing, no bank account. Inside, the air was stale. Dust lined the countertops. A stack of unpaid utility bills sat on the table, all postmarked within the last year, which meant someone had been living there, just not recently. Then Dougal noticed something odd. The back door had been forced from the inside out. Whoever left fast. Crime scene tech swept the place. They found a broken phone on the counter, a single boot print near the threshold, and a flash drive hidden under a loose floorboard. On it, business invoices, schematics, and correspondence between Westerfield and Joseph McStay. The messages were polite at first, then desperate, then angry. "You promised payment this week. Don't ignore me, Joe. If you cut me out, I swear I'll make you regret it." The last message was dated February 4th, 2010, the day the McStay family disappeared. That changed everything. Detectives brought the evidence back to the San Bernardino Sheriff's Office. They ran the boot print, the email address, the IP logs. Everything pointed to the same identity. But when they tried to trace Westerfield's last known movements, his trail ended 3 days after McStay's disappearance, near Barstow. A gas station camera caught his pickup heading north. After that, he vanished. The press never heard that name. The department kept it under wraps while they pieced together the timeline. Merritt was still the prime suspect publicly. But behind closed doors, even prosecutors were uneasy. Either Merritt had help, Dougal said in a late-night briefing, or we've been chasing the wrong man for 3 years. One detective scoffed. Then where's Westerfield now? People don't just disappear. Dougal looked up from the files. They do in this case. 2 weeks later, a forensic analyst named Claire Ramos made a breakthrough that would change everything again. She was running old phone records from McStay residents through a new data filter, technology that hadn't existed when the case first broke. One number kept appearing in the background of multiple calls, masked under prepaid accounts and burner IDs. When she cross-referenced it, the signal matched the cell tower near McStay home and another near Westerfield's address. The same tower pinged both phones on the same nights. Coincidence? Not likely. The analyst dug deeper. That burner phone had also connected once, just once, to a cell tower near the Victorville desert where the bodies were found. When Ramos showed the data to Dougal, he stared at the printout in silence. The timestamp was haunting. 11:23 p.m., February 4th, 2010. That was the night they vanished. By then, the pressure was mounting. Local news outlets had reignited interest after the desert discovery. Talk shows speculated on everything from cartel involvement to staged disappearances. The FBI wanted results. The McStay families wanted closure. But every step closer they got to Westerfield, the stranger the story became. His background was a patchwork of half-truths. His Social Security number linked to 2 different birth records. His driver's license photo looked almost digitally altered. Even his listed date of birth varied across databases. It was as if Michael Westerfield wasn't a person, but an identity someone had built. Then came the letter. A plain envelope, no return address, postmarked from Arizona. Inside, a single sheet of paper. You're digging in the wrong direction. Some things were never meant to be found. Fingerprints? None. DNA? None. But the handwriting? Nearly a match for one of the notes found in Westerfield House. Dougal's instincts screamed it wasn't over. Someone was still watching. Late one evening, after hours of reviewing files, Dougal noticed something buried in the original case photos. Something no one had paid attention to before. In one shot of the McStay family kitchen, just above the counter, was a wall calendar. February 2010. On the date February 5th, written in black ink, MW 9 a.m., he pulled out the old case logs. February 5th, 9 a.m. was the morning after they vanished. That meeting had never happened. Or had it? He replayed the timeline over and over. The family was last heard from around 7:47 p.m., February 4th. Phone activity stopped minutes later. If Westerfield was supposed to meet them the next morning, why were they dead that night? Unless the meeting wasn't about business. Unless it was the trap that brought them out of their home. By mid-2014, the case had consumed the department. Dougal's team re-interviewed Merritt, who denied knowing any Westerfield. He admitted he'd argued with Joseph about money, but insisted he had nothing to do with the deaths. Yet, when he was shown one of the forged checks again, he froze. Not at his name, but at the signature on the bottom. Who wrote this? Dougal asked. Merritt hesitated. That's not Joe's handwriting. Then whose is it? He swallowed hard. Looks like Mike's. That was the confirmation Dougal needed, but it raised a deeper question. If Merritt knew Westerfield, why had he lied? Was he covering for him? Working with him? Or was he scared of him? The day after that interrogation, Merritt disappeared. His truck was found abandoned outside a casino in Temecula. Inside, an empty wallet and unfinished beer and a single playing card, the King of Spades. Detectives feared the worst. Either he'd fled, or someone had silenced him. Then, 3 days later, a hiker reported seeing a man matching Merritt's description wandering near the San Bernardino foothills. Disoriented and filthy, when officers approached, he didn't resist. He looked up at Dougal, eyes bloodshot, voice trembling. "You don't understand," he whispered. "He's still out there." "Who?" "Westerfield." "But Mike Westerfield's been missing for years." Merritt shook his head slowly. "That's because that's not his real name." He leaned closer, his voice barely audible. He worked for someone bigger, someone Joe was about to expose. Detective Dougal felt his stomach drop. The McStay murders weren't just about a business dispute. They were about something much larger, something buried under layers of false identities and forged deals. For the first time, he realized the impossible might be true, that the killer hadn't just wanted to erase the McStays, but everyone connected to them. And now, with Merritt in custody and terrified, Dougal knew one thing for certain. The case wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because later that night, when forensics analyzed the flash drive again, they found an encrypted folder that had gone unnoticed before, one that, when decrypted, revealed coordinates. Not to the desert, to somewhere far closer. A place Merritt swore he'd never been. The encrypted folder's coordinates led to an industrial storage facility on the outskirts of Riverside County. A vast sprawl of corrugated metal units tucked behind a gas station, the kind of place people use for old furniture or business equipment. Unit 209, registered under a fake name, had been rented since 2010, paid in cash. No surveillance cameras facing the door. Detective Troy Dougal stood before the unit just after dawn, search warrant in hand. The sun bleeding pale orange over the horizon. The metal lock was brand new. "Open it," he ordered quietly. The door groaned upward. Inside, the air was heavy, dust and motor oil and something older like rusting iron. Against one wall stood a workbench lined with parts, blueprints, and 3 disassembled computer towers. On the opposite wall, rolls of construction blueprints, each marked with Joseph McStay's company logo. But those weren't the same designs they'd seen before. These were different. They were layouts of drainage systems and water features, tied to contracts with names stamped on every corner. Valerio Development Group, a name the investigators had heard before. It was the same firm that had hired Joseph for a large residential project in 2009, a project that abruptly fell through months before he vanished. Back then, it was dismissed as a simple business failure. But now, seeing those plans scattered across the storage unit, something clicked. Hidden among the blueprints was a folder marked Private. Inside were receipts, cash payments, dated weeks before the disappearance, with notes written in shorthand. The handwriting matched Michael Westerfield's, and one line in particular made everyone in that room freeze. Meeting confirmed, February 5th. Final delivery. $45,000 due. Delivery? Of what? Then Dougal saw the other document. A page torn from a ledger. Only one name stood out, scrawled at the bottom beside an untraceable bank number. Valerio. That afternoon, the detectives drove to the listed business address. It was supposed to be an architectural office, but the building was empty, locked up, lease expired years ago. Records showed the company's board had dissolved quietly in early 2010. The listed CEO, Anthony Valerio, hadn't filed taxes since then. Digging deeper, they found something buried in financial records. Valerio had been under federal scrutiny for money laundering through shell construction contracts. The same period Joseph's business had suddenly spiked in profit. Joseph hadn't been a criminal. He'd been caught in someone else's web. The realization hit hard. Westerfield hadn't been angry about money. He'd been the middleman in a laundering scheme, a fixer cleaning invoices and funneling cash through small contractors like McStay's business. When Joseph discovered what was happening and threatened to expose it, they silenced him. Merritt hadn't forged the checks for greed. He'd done it because he was ordered to under pressure. He'd been framed as the perfect scapegoat, a man with debts, an easy story for media. But now, the trail pointed back to Valerio, a man who, according to every public record, had died in a boating accident off Catalina Island in 2011. The only problem? That accident report didn't exist in any Coast Guard file. Weeks passed as the FBI stepped in, turning the local case into a federal one. They traced Valerio's financial movements, transfers to offshore accounts, hidden real estate purchases, new identities. The name Michael Westerfield popped up again, linked to one of those accounts. It wasn't a contractor's alias. It was a ghost identity Valerio had created years earlier, one he'd used to run side operations and payoffs without tying anything to himself. That meant the man who'd met Joseph, the man seen near the McStay home, whose emails and threats matched Westerfield's, was most likely Valerio himself, and the so-called boating accident. A cover, but what sealed it came from Merritt's confession, reluctantly given after weeks in protective custody. His voice shook as he recounted the night of February 4th, 2010. "Joe called me," he said. He said he'd found something in the books, money that didn't add up. He told me he was meeting Valerio's guy the next morning to clear it up. He was scared, said he was thinking of going to the police. Merritt paused, staring down at the table. I told him not to. Said these people weren't the kind you crossed. When the detectives asked who these people were, Merritt only whispered, developers, investors, the kind with everything to lose. Then he said the line that broke the case open. I didn't kill him, but I know who did, and you'll never find him because he never stopped walking among us. 3 months later, a joint task force raided a villa outside Mazatlan, Mexico. The property was registered under a British passport name, Arthur Vallon, age 54. The man living there fit Anthony Valerio's profile perfectly, down to an old scar above his left eyebrow. Inside his study, authorities found files, burner phones, and blueprints, the same McStay designs from years earlier. And on the desk sat a single-framed photograph, Joseph McStay shaking hands with him at a construction site, both smiling. Valerio, or whatever his name really was, had built his new life atop the ruin of his old one. When the news broke, it hit like a shockwave. The family who vanished had been victims of a senseless killing. They'd been casualties of corporate greed, buried to protect a criminal empire dressed in suits and real estate deals. Valerio was extradited to the U.S. to face charges of murder, fraud, and money laundering. The trial dragged for years, filled with denials, missing evidence, and sudden witness recantations. Then, before sentencing, Valerio collapsed in his cell. Heart failure, the coroner said. No foul play found. The truth died with him. Or so they thought. A year later, Detective Dougal received a package at his home. No return address. Inside, a flash drive. One file. Riverside_Unit 209-P4. It was surveillance footage, grainy night vision. The same storage unit where they'd found the blueprints. But the date stamp read 2 weeks after the FBI raid. In the footage, the roll-up door creaked open. A tall man stepped inside, his face hidden under a hood. He looked around, reached for the workbench, and lifted something from beneath it, a small, black case. Then he turned to the camera just before the feed cut off. His face was visible for less than a second. It wasn't Valerio. It wasn't Westerfield. It was someone else, someone the investigators had never identified. And when Dougal replayed the frame in slow motion, he realized what was in the man's hand. A key ring. On one of the tags, written in faded ink, was the name Dougal. The screen fades to black. They solved the crime, but maybe not the story. Some crimes aren't meant to be explained. They're warnings. If you think this case was closed, you're not ready for what's next. Subscribe, because the next story makes this one look like an accident.